we have created a 5-step guide for you to help you reconcile your body and your mind. The goal of these steps is to help you improve self-acceptance, physical health, and mental health, not to help you become a model. Just as an aside, people that compete in things like physique competitions, and that's where the emphasis is really just on appearance and leanness and things like that. People that do that kind of thing are actually at a pretty high risk of developing an eating disorder.
Okay, well, I have to change my life plans there. That's good to know.
So let's launch into the 5 steps.
Excellent. Yeah, so the first one that we talked about is being aware of any mental health issues that may need to be addressed in terms of being able to improve your relationship with food and body image. What are some of the points that you think are important to bear in mind on that issue?
Sometimes issues with food, under eating, and certainly overeating are actually related to a person's attempt to try to deal with painful emotions or memories. So actually, 1 in 4 people that have a binge eating problem have PTSD. That's actually pretty high.
Yeah, that's a startling stat, actually.
Right. And there are other conditions as well. Like I know you know this too, Chris, but depression, one of the symptoms of depression can be an impairment in appetite, either under eating or overeating. And so if you're struggling with your mental health and really having problems with food, you may need to come talk to a mental health specialist.
Yeah, and I think that's such a crucial point, because I know in some of our other videos we've talked about other approaches to eating and good body image, like intuitive eating. And often the comment is made in those approaches, don't eat for emotional reasons,
right.
but they don't really lay out a roadmap for
How
that.
does one do that?
And I imagine
right.
a lot of people are being driven by potential mental health issues. You mentioned depression or past trauma, or maybe even anxiety.
It could be anxiety. Yeah. Sometimes people are eating in a nervous way. So you don't have to, it doesn't mean you have a mental health disorder if you're overeating or undereating. It's just a good place to start, is maybe, get an assessment, go talk to somebody.
Yeah.
See if that kind of fits.
It's a great point, because I imagine if people did have that as an issue, maybe they've been following other food plans and not getting the results they want. And for some, maybe that missing piece is really addressing an underlying mental health concern.
Right. So that's step number 1 we've created here, is seek mental health treatment if you think that applies.
Yeah.
Step number 2, what is it?
Yeah, so the second step is improving your nutrition. And this can be a minefield, I know, for a lot of people, because think of all the different philosophies and ideologies and approaches in terms of what you should eat and what you shouldn't eat. But one point you made, and I thought this was great, is that there are some commonalities in terms of what seems to hold true over time for good nutrition. What are some of those that people could keep in mind in terms of good practices?
Right. I think the most solid thing I've learned about nutrition from all of my reading and studying is that whole foods are best, right? If you can get them, right? So we're talking about fruits, vegetables, lean proteins, healthy fats, and probiotics, which let me come back to that in just a minute. But, the closer to the source of food is, the better. Now, certainly a lot of people have food issues. They have allergies or sensitivities, and so that should be respected. But with that aside, we are omnivores. Most of us can and should eat, a wide variety of things, because it can improve our health. So back to, did I mention something about the microbiome?
Yeah, probiotics.
Probiotics. Right. So one of the new frontiers, I think, of nutrition, and we're not dietitians or nutritionists, right? But what we have learned is that we have billions of microbes within us, and they communicate and have important functions within us, including to help regulate our hunger and satiety hormones, which is wild. And so because there's a whole ecosystem in there, one of the best things we can do for that is to give them lots of good nourishing foods, but also probiotics, and also just exercise. Exercise even can kind of help the microbiome.
Yeah, exactly.
So we want to improve the ecosystem.
Right. No, that's a really great point. And I've heard the gut referred to as the second brain, partly because there are more serotonin receptors in the gut than even the brain. It kind of contributes to mood and even mental health. So really, that does seem to be a new frontier, both in terms of weight loss, overall health, and even mental health.
Mental health, yes. Well, the building blocks for all of the neurotransmitters, you mentioned serotonin, but don't all of the building blocks for those neurotransmitters come from our food, right? So we really do want to try to optimize our nutrition if we can. Now, obviously, some people are in tough circumstances, or maybe money is an issue or access is an issue. So just do the best you can.
Yeah, I like that there's some leeway there, but really good point about trying to limit as much as possible processed foods. I was reading some of Michael Pollan's work. He's written a lot on food and nutrition, and he gives some good advice. Don't eat anything that your great grandmother would not have recognized as food.
Yeah,
I
like what
thought
is that?
that was
Yeah,
really good.
yeah.
And another of his points was when shopping, try to get most of your stuff from the peripheries of the supermarket
I've
rather
read
from the
that.
middle aisles, because in American supermarkets, at least, most of the processed stuff is kind of in that middle
It is in
section.
the middle, yeah, and the outskirts would be like, yeah, the produce and the meats, things
Right,
like the dairy.
vegetables.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a good rule of thumb, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And one other piece I would add before we go into the next step with improve your nutrition, step 2, is it's not just what you eat, it's also how you eat. And by that, I mean having a relaxing environment, maybe sometimes connecting with others and sharing a meal, that actually contributes a lot to your relationship with food and your health, in addition to just what's on your plate.
That's so true, because we know that when we're under a stress response, food is handled differently within the body. We don't absorb as many of the nutrients. We may store more fat even. And so we want to try to, the best we can, strike a tone at mealtime of being relaxed and having a peaceful environment and enjoying ourselves. Right?
So I can have that candy bar as long as I'm relaxed and with other people.
Maybe
it's a little bit healthier, right?
Give it a try. Yeah. Report back what you find out, right? Okay, step number 3.
Yeah, so increase physical fitness. Why don't you kick us off with that one? What do you feel like are some of the key takeaways there?
There's so much that we know about the health benefits of exercise. And I think just the main point we want to make here is not about all of the health benefits of exercise, but that it's important to just try to have fun and get some movement, and to focus more on what the body can do and less on what it looks like, right? Because our society can get overconsumed with appearances, right? And just, yeah, what you look like overall. And we're saying, for yourself, try to respect yourself and try to improve some other aspect of your body besides just the appearance, right? So we're talking about endurance or speed or skill, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, what you said reminded me of a book I came across on body image. Don't remember the author, but the subtitle was Your Body is an Instrument, Not an Ornament. And I thought that was a great way of summarizing the importance of focusing on what your body can do, not what the weight is on the scale exclusively, or things like that. And physical fitness is a big part of that, challenging yourself to improve in whatever way your capacity and your enjoyment of what you're able to accomplish with your body.
Right. And try not to have maybe an all or none view about exercise too. I mean, I've seen this happen to clients. If they're not in the gym doing a certain type of workout, then it just doesn't count, they feel like, in their minds. And I think, that's probably not the best mindset. If you go for a walk every day, hey, that's great. Or you increase the walk a little bit of a distance, you've done something pretty good for your body.
Yeah, I like that idea that it can go too far in that direction where maybe people are rigid, or I've heard with got to get in my 10,000 steps, it's a major event. If I fall a little bit short occasionally, and that doesn't seem conducive either to optimal health.
Right. So
our next step 4.
Develop a positive body image. There's so much, that we have here. We have three steps. Accepting your body as it is, regardless of what it looks like. That means you're going to say, most of us don't like every aspect of our bodies. Do you like every aspect of your body?
No, and I know you brought up in a previous conversation, if we fixate on anything that's not perfect about our bodies, we're going to find something. It's just the nature. So part of the game here is learning to shift the focus away from that level of scrutiny.
Right. So part of developing the healthy, positive body image would be, I don't like certain things about my body, but I'm going to pledge to take care of it and to respect it as best I can. So that means I'm not going to starve it. I'm not going to, punish myself. I'm not going to abuse myself or put myself down. A lot of people maybe have negative body talk. Negative body talk is when you call yourself names or you're demeaning towards your body. And so I would say, let's cut that out of there and let's improve body image.
Right. You can't keep cracking the whip and kind of get to better physical or mental health. So I guess maybe over the big heading here is self-kindness, learning to practice self-compassion in this regard.
I read this somewhere, so I can't take full credit for it, but you cannot hate yourself into well-being, right? Doesn't that ring true?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it doesn't get you
and yet surprising how many of us can fall into that tendency.
Right. Next one is having metrics of like your weight or things like that. Clients ask me, should I weigh myself? Should I not weigh myself? It really depends on your relationship to the scale. So I have, I've worked with folks who getting on the scale every once a month or so kind of is helpful feedback to them, but they don't make it about their self-worth. And if there's a little bit of a fluctuation, it's not the end of the world. So that is probably okay. Yeah. But if you're doing it obsessively and compulsively and it's ruining your day, if your weight's gone up 1 pound, you should probably step away from the scale.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you raised that because it sounds like there's a sweet spot between maybe not weighing at all, which is advocated by some approaches. It's kind of demonized to ever step on a scale. But I hear you saying if we're healthy, that can be helpful feedback to know if adjustments are needed.
Yeah.
But once I'm weighing multiple times a day, I'm gone way too far in the other direction, which is common too, right?
Right, because then it's obsessive and compulsive and it creates more misery, right? So if it's just information and you can be kind of neutral about it and just take some feedback, that's one thing. If it's going to ruin your whole day or week, then probably just leave that out.
Yeah. So another topic that for me falls under this step of improving body image is being aware of how much we're influenced by the media, by depictions, because that really is a powerful cultural force. And if we're envisioning an impossibly unrealistic body image as something we should be able to achieve, we're never going to be successful, right? So part of this work seems to be, okay, I want to be healthy. Maybe I have goals about how I want to look, but I need to kind of tune out certain messages from the culture or from the media.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So obsessing, right? We don't want to obsess about being perfect. We don't want to obsess about any aspect of the body. We don't want to check anything frequently. So sometimes people get into habits of comparing themselves to others, comparing themselves to models, checking certain aspects of their appearance frequently, and that is a path to misery, right?
Yeah.
And so we encourage people to really, tone that down and recognize nobody's body is perfect,
right?
And to just have more realistic standards, right?
That makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned avoiding too frequent use of the scale. I think another one in that category would be looking in the mirror repeatedly throughout the day. That seems to be a behavior that comes up a lot around this.
It could even be like measuring yourself or, touching certain parts of your body to see if they've changed throughout the day. Yeah. So if you are having that problem, try to stop. If you can't, go back to step number 1, seek some mental health treatment. We help people with that kind of stuff.
Right. Exactly. And that's really worth emphasizing, that step 1, that so often, even if there's not a severe mental health issue, there is often a psychological aspect of improving body image and food relationship.
That's a great point, Chris. You don't have to have a severe disorder to benefit from some therapy.
Right, exactly. Maybe that's just one thing you address, but certainly worth bringing up with your therapist.
Right. And last but not least, what do we have here?
So our final step in this 5-part system is adopt mindful eating with permission and limits. So I'd love to hear you talk more about the permission and the limits part.
Yeah. So you and I have we dove into intuitive eating a lot, right? And we're like, here are the parts that we agree with. Here's what we're critical of. And one of the steps of intuitive eating is giving yourself unconditional permission to eat. And we just kind of thought that seems like a bad idea. It's just too extreme, too overblown, right?
Right, exactly.
And so I think what works better for people, and having worked with clients literally with this approach, is you should have permission. You should give yourself permission anytime you really feel you need to eat. But what you want to optimally do is try to mostly do that because you're hungry, and then try to, stop when you're full. And the limits parts means that you're recognizing that you have, to the extent that you have any nutrition information or knowledge, you're using that. And so if you're hungry, you want to prioritize the most nutritious food you can find first, right? You want to eat your dinner, right? So to speak, like your chicken and your vegetables, maybe you've got some whole grain bread, and the cake or the donut or the candy or whatever that you also kind of want, you're putting limits around that part of it because it's not very nutrient dense. It's not really going to be that healthful for you to overdo that part of it.
Yeah.
Does that mean it should be off limits? Altogether? What happens when we tell ourselves we can't have any of a certain food?
Yeah, it tends to make us obsess even more about trying to get that type of food, right? So it sounds like we're really charting a middle ground position between, on the one hand, approaches that are about extreme restriction, which are unhealthy, not sustainable. But on the other hand, we're not going so far on the other side, which is the kind of unconditional permission of something like intuitive eating, where it kind of demonizes any attempts to set boundaries or limits around food, which just doesn't seem realistic either.
It's not realistic. When else in life do we have unconditional permission to do something, right?
True.
The last point here is, to try to be mindful about eating. Enjoy your food, really. I mean, eat slowly and with awareness, and try. And if you eat slower, you're better able to recognize too when you're full.
Yeah.
It takes like 45 minutes to an hour. Did you know that? To recognize when you're full.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's, if you're shoveling it in really quickly, it can
well,
go
and that's
by.
another reason, because I'm remembering now we had talked about mindfulness being a big part of achieving, healthy eating. And I've read some of Jon Kabat-Zinn stuff, and
he's good.
He uses an example of like when we're eating, we're kind of, as we're putting in one fork full, we're already like thinking and moving towards that next mouthful, and kind of just, if we can slow that down, savor, right, what's already in our mouths, and that probably helps with things like satiety and also just general food enjoyment.
Yeah. Why eat something that's good if you're not going to slow down to actually enjoy it?
Right. Which I think also means maybe when we're eating, focusing really on the eating experience and not having too many other distractions, driving, TV, etc.
Right. And I think Americans, we particularly struggle with that part of it. We're always on the go. We live by schedules a lot of times. And I think if you have the luxury to kind of slow down and lengthen your meal times and just enjoy them, I think you should.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Yeah, so that comes to our next point of no restricting. And so what that restriction really, it's got a bad name, right? It kind of comes from this idea of diet culture where people are always strictly controlling their calories to try to achieve a certain weight. And we know that doesn't really work very well. And so not that a person couldn't cut back calories somewhat, maybe for a while, but the more severe the restriction, the worse the fallout's going to be.
Right. Starvation is not sustainable.
Starvation is not sustainable, nor is it healthy. So really the general rule here is don't restrict calories below what your body needs to maintain health. Now, how do you know what that is? Well, you might need to consult, a dietitian or get some extra knowledge around that. But certainly if you're hungry all of the time and you're not feeling good, you're probably not eating enough. Right. Just kind of as a general principle.
So it sounds like we're saying there really is no reason or expectation for people to consistently deny hunger, but maybe they make better choices. Maybe they sometimes choose things that are going to serve their nutrition more and not just empty calories.
Right. On the other hand, restriction and self-restraint are not necessarily the same thing. Self-restraint might be I'm recognizing I'm no longer eating because I'm hungry. I'm just eating for some other reason, pleasure or, whatever, some other emotional reason. So then my approach might be I'm going to try to do that only in moderation.
I like that. And then maybe after we do it a little bit, we then ask ourselves, what would most nourish this particular need? And as you pointed out, maybe that's not food. Maybe that's social connection, or relaxation, or something else. But to ask yourself that question and not just mindlessly eat.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You can't starve yourself into health.
Yeah,
but you shouldn't give yourself unconditional permission to eat either, right? So it's like there's these extremes, and you and I have been asking, well, what's in the middle? There's got to be something in the middle.
There's got to be a sweet spot.
A sweet spot.
Can kind of honor some of these principles without being too far on the extremes.
That's a funny pun, also. A sweet spot. Speaking of sweets, right? So all or none thinking around food. This is all or none thinking is a big cognitive trap or a big thought trap. Maybe cognitive is a big word. I don't know, but a big trap a lot of us fall into. So all or none thinking with food would look like, oh, I told myself I wasn't going to have cake or dessert anymore, and I had a piece of cake, so I've messed up. So now I should eat the whole cake because I already screwed up, and then tomorrow I'll go on this big deprivation diet. So that's a really awful trap and probably a pretty bad approach. What could people do instead?
No, I think that's a great example of how really there is always this psychological element behind healthy eating, because that's a great example of black and white or all or nothing thinking. And I think that's an area where we would want to step back and to honor the middle ground position, say, maybe I enjoy some dessert, I indulge a little, that can be healthy, but then I stop after the one piece of cake or whatever. I don't use that as permission to then binge and then feel horrible and regret it and maybe get into some unhealthy cycle.
And so that also requires people to have some mindfulness and awareness of what they're doing, to kind of being able to practice that. So try, being aware of how things are going when you're eating and how you're feeling and what your motivation is to keep eating. Is it hunger? Great. Is it something else? Maybe you try to slow down. So if you're having difficulty with that piece of it, you got to go back to steps 1 and 2, right? Do you need some mental health therapy? Do you need some nutritional counseling? what is it that you need?
Right. And I think for many, maybe all of the above, and pulling together those different strands is probably optimal if possible.
I think one of the bottom lines here is this stuff is tricky and complicated, and maybe people need support sometimes. But maybe we don't give ourselves permission to get that support always.
Yeah, I like that. Well, great advice.
Good conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. And if you're interested, check out our other videos and subscribe to our channel.